I'm Etta Spencer. Let's go to Ottawa today. But in fact, let's go maybe all around the world today. How about being a tourist? I haven't been outside of my apartment for over 16 months, but it's about time to get out and get a little fresh air. And today we're going to talk to a man who leads and manages tourism. And the question is, can tourism be sustainable? And I've had some guilt feelings myself about trips that I've taken in the past. But let's see if there's a way that we can do this in a responsible way, shall we? Okay, today my guest is Edward Manning, Ted Manning, who's in Ottawa. He is the head of something called Tourisk, a company, but he's done a lot of work helping sort of advise people about how tourism could be better for the world than it oftentimes is. Good morning, Ted.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you, Meta. Everybody wants to travel. Like you, I'm trapped here in Canada. It's the first time I've ever been in one place for a year, and it's wearing. So that's why I put one of the famous tourist spots, Oya, on Santorini behind me, because that's where I'd like to be today if I really was able.
This is beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. I also am a photographer, so it's kind of neat to try and find places like that around the world, and there are really so many. What I do for a living is I've got the world's best job. I go to the nicest social, cultural, environmental places on the planet and try and help them make sure that it's still as nice after you leave. The biggest issue we've got with tourism is how on earth we can do it without spoiling the very things that we seek. That is a challenge. It's the world's largest sector now, or certainly was before COVID, and it's going to come back with a vengeance. And everybody travels unless you're trapped in a place like North Korea. No one can stop people from traveling. And quite frankly, even if you can't get to where I'd like to be, just going a few towns along to have some better food, some more interesting culture, you're a tourist. It really is part of the total character of people. So what I do for a living, and I have for a number of years for the Canadian government, for the UN, for my company now, is travel around the world helping people create the situations where you can visit without wrecking it, where the impact, imprint or the footprint of each individual is reduced. We offer you interesting things to do, but we make certain that it has been prepared in advance so that you can't take something home you shouldn't, wreck things, leave garbage, do a whole range of things that we know tourists will do if not given a degree of guidance.
What kinds of preparation? How are you going to keep people from stealing souvenirs, for example?
Well, it's the guys who do it best actually is Disney. They have a lovely approach where they're selling actual tourism management plans around the world. I'll just give you one example from Barbados. There's a beautiful series of caves in Barbados that you can go through, some of the prettiest stalactites and stalagmites you'll ever see. And the biggest problem is, of course, the fragile. If too many people are touching them, breathing, etc. So they put a lovely little tourist train in, and you go for a nice ride through it. Lights only come on when you're there on the train. And it looks like you can touch the stalactites and the stalagmites, but you just can't. They're just far enough away so a person could never touch them. They're not allowed to sit around breathing on them for very long before they put the ventilation through. They plan the entire journey so that they're having a wonderful time. They do not know they are being programmed. They have a great time. The assets are maintained, and not only that, but you walk through a lovely ecological path on the way in and out. That's all done. That's all planned in advance. Most people don't even know that they're being made to do things that they might likely do otherwise.
Isn't that fascinating? Well, I love it. And it's a very, very clever thing because you're not insulting anybody by saying, please do not steal stuff. Uh-huh. Okay, now suppose you've got Santorini in your background, this
Yes, I do.
spectacular place. If you were, I don't know, I've never been on a tour there, of course, but if you
Mhm.
were leading a group there, they would be marching around up and down these stairs. Is that right?
Mhm.
And
Well, first, I don't lead groups. I plan it so that when people do, they essentially understand the rules when they get there. And a lot of people don't behave well. Some cultures are a little less aware of needing to respect others, whether they're environments, cultures, or whatever. So, what do? Well, first, we harden certain paths so that they don't get a chance to walk on the stuff they could damage. In Santorini, we control the number of people who are up there because there is a funicular that goes up and down from any cruise ship that comes in. It has a limited number of people can go up and down each time, so it's a de facto limit on how many come. Most of them, certainly a lot of older people, do not want to walk up and down stairs. So by putting relatively level paths that will take most of the people, the impact on the community is diminished. We do timing of tours so that we will let only so many people at a time into a place. Like for example, the Alhambra in Granada. They're timed, so you know that you can only get in when you have the ticket that says you're at 3:15, and the ticket has a color, so it's good for an hour and a half, and then you've got to be out of there for the next lot in. Essentially, we're doing people management, we're doing ecological management, we're doing hardening. In fact, a lot of it is negotiated with the people themselves, because no one knows what the limit to acceptable change really is in a community if they are in fact going to be significantly impacted by large numbers of people arriving. And that's a significant part in the negotiation with the tourism industry on how many people they're allowed to bring in, under what conditions, under what times, and so on. I mean, you don't want to take them into the cathedral the same time that the Archbishop is holding a very important session. So we time them and we time the numbers. We were doing some work in Odessa, in Ukraine, when a cruise ship put all 36 buses right into the cathedral when they were actually doing the vesting of the new Archbishop, and that was a mess. I was actually there. I was there at the time, and by the time we left, we had spent some time with them, convincing them how to actually stage and time buses, so at least all 40 don't now arrive at the same time.
Okay, well, I used to travel more. I don't travel anymore, but I wonder about rudeness. I mean, I was on a tour in China in 1980, which was, it was so early in the contact between Westerners and Chinese that they were fascinated by us. They would come and put, we'd be on a bus and they would put their nose up against the window, watching to see what kind of weird things we Western people would do. And so it was still a new experience for the general people. But of course, there were guides and there were functionaries who were in charge of things. And I was shocked and appalled at the behavior of the other people on my tour, because they tended to treat the guides or the interpreters and so on as slaves or as subhuman, or they were very overbearing and acted as if they, we Westerners are in charge of things and you guys don't know anything. It was just awful. And I didn't know how common that was. I hadn't been on many tours, if any, at that point. But I wonder if this happens a lot, if it still happens. And it's so early in the contact between East and West. I would blame these people for hating Westerners, and it was just an awful, if we were ambassadors for goodwill, we sure did a bad job of it. How common is that kind of rudeness?
It is really generic. And the actual studies of human behaviors when they're away from home show that they are outside the constraints that their normal peer group. That's them. So they will be behaving more loudly, more badly. And this is not culturally specific. Yes, the very first times that large numbers of Americans or Russians or Chinese or Latin Americans go abroad, they have not necessarily been trained how to deal with other cultures. In fact, many of them are not used to meeting other cultures. And certainly back in the mid 2000s or in the mid 1900s, it was for many of the people, it was the first time they'd ever met somebody who didn't look just like them. So it was both curiosity and surprise, but also insensitivity. There are now a lot of tour companies who are doing a fair bit of work in advance to take people into small communities around the world, but to have them prepared. In the extreme case, in a jungle community in Guyana, where you can go in and live with the tribe, you must live for 2 weeks ahead of time, learning the culture, learning parts of the language before you are taken in 6 people at a time into a little village that has agreed to host you. That is the most extreme control on behaviors to make certain that the cultural contact is acceptable.
Does it work?
Yes, but it certainly doesn't work everywhere. I mean, there are many other communities that are not prepared when they open up and they suddenly discover that people are coming in and taking away their flowers in a sense. I mean, and that's also not any given culture. I remember talking to some people on Lindisfarne, a small island off of the east coast of England, where they were appalled that when tourists from their own country came in and thought they could steal their flowers, or in steal their flowers and eat their strawberries. Again, a total lack of understanding that as a visitor, you are indeed a guest. So we do a lot of work training them. I've run several projects in Cuba dealing with trying to set up ecotourism sites and preserve the reefs. And we've actually worked with the airline companies to put a training video on as they fly in, so that in the last half hour, they're showing some of the beautiful assets that are there in Cuba, but also told to don't step on the coral, don't pick up shells, don't walk over the beautiful flowers, don't disturb the birds in the bird sanctuaries. Essentially just trying to program them so they will have a very good time. We don't program them, we entertain them, and showing them what is generally seen as acceptable by the culture there and the tourist enterprises seems to work. Not for everybody, but it is certainly a good way to ease the cultural contact that people will have.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a bit concerned about simple greenhouse gas emissions. I once, about 20 years ago, or maybe not that long, when we first began to be worried about global warming, I made a promise that I would not, I'd restrict my travel to things that were essential and that I would not fly. So I looked into cruises. And there was a cruise going from Florida. It was one of those things where they were returning the ships to the Mediterranean, because in the summer they go around the Mediterranean, but they have to take it back from Florida in order to do it. So it was a crossing to the Mediterranean and then around the Mediterranean for 16 days or something. Yeah. So I signed up for that, thinking that I was being a good citizen. And only later did I realize and find out that cruise ships are the worst offenders of all. They use this bunker oil and they emit terrible greenhouse gases. So I feel, instead of being a good citizen, I was unintentionally a bad one. And I had an argument with a dear friend of mine a few months ago who happened to be on a cruise in Asia when COVID hit, and on one of those ships that they wouldn't let them dock because they all were catching the disease and transmitting it and stuff. And so it took him extra long to find a way to even get home.
Mhm.
And then I jumped all over him for even having gone. I said, that's not a good thing to take those cruises because you're causing global warming to worsen. Well, he was not offended, but he defended his position, which was saying that he felt he learned enough and shared enough to make it worth a lot. I'm sure it was a very good trip, apart from the pandemic. So tell me about whether or not we can handle tourism with respect to the very fact that just plain moving from one place to another causes greenhouse emissions.
Yes, it does. And one of the biggest challenges is to try and lower the footprint. And again, there are a lot of tricks, and I'll give you a few. I'm actually, I'll admit right now that I have worked with the cruise industries a few, and I lectured a lot on cruise ships all around Latin America. So I'm not 100% unbiased. At the same time, the kinds of breakthroughs hopefully will help. An irony is the largest ships per passenger are the most efficient.
Oh,
Per passenger, not for the total amount. They also have the ability on board to handle all of their waste, to handle all of their other risks as a floating city. The other point I would make is that one cruise ship off of Asia, unfortunately had an infected tour from Wuhan on board that nobody knew about. And as a result, over about 70% of all of the people who died on cruise ships globally were on that one ship.
oh, really?
There's
But excuse me, but I think that a lot of other ships were affected by the concern, right? Because
yes, totally. They wouldn't let
wasn't
any
on that
cruise
one
ship.
ship. So far as I know, he wasn't on that bad ship, but he was. But they wouldn't let him off the ship anyway.
That's correct. Well, I remember at the time nobody knew what it was, and they didn't know why that ship was a plague ship and the next one wasn't. So almost all of the deaths on ships occurred on only two ships. There are about a half a dozen or about a dozen other ships that had one or more people on them who were infected, but really the bulk was there. It was bad timing. They had a tour from the source on board before they knew anything, and of course they were all behaving just like everyone does on cruise ships. It's going to be interesting to see how they come back. There's an immense political fight happening right now between people who say we were only going to allow people who are fully vaccinated on board, and others who say you can't do that. It's a violation of human rights. And if they wish to run a plague ship, they can. So we shall see. I'm watching it.
That's a good question legally. Who's going to decide that? Because if a ship is owned and under one flag, is it the country of the flag that they're flying is going to make the legal determination, or is there some sort of international law that would cover such issues?
No, there is not. As a consequence, yes, the country has some influence, but many of them are tiny little countries who almost not heard of because they put them there to have much lower standards for particularly for staffing. Internationally, we're getting environmental standards now that won't let ships land in ports that have high standards, and that's becoming universal, led mainly by the west coast of North America, where they've brought a lot of pressure on. I'll go back to that in a minute because there's some really interesting positive stuff happening there. The big fight right now is between perceptions of human health and protection and privacy rights. And since so many of the world ships are based in and leave from Miami, the government of Florida has forbidden them to even ask if anybody has a vaccine, ask if they are contaminated, and to ask them to wear a mask. And the cruise ships are saying, just a minute, we are not letting anyone on our ship if they do not have at least some protections. As a result, in the last month or two, many ships have left Florida, and you may have to get on in the Bahamas or Cozumel or Houston rather than getting on the ship where you used to in Florida. It's playing out as we speak now. They're actually they're aiming eventually, maybe even for the Supreme Court in the States. So it's a rather interesting exercise to watch, and it pertains to international law and human rights. And I have no idea how it's going to play out.
Oh, isn't that amazing? Okay, yeah. Well, clearly I would be, I don't know about you, but for sure, I'm really in favor of saying, if you can't prove that you've been vaccinated, you can't do anything. You got to stay in your house.
Certainly Canada is about to only allow people from other countries in if they are fully vaccinated. Or if they have other very strict protocols, which we have yet to see. They'll be out in the next few days, we think. Anyway, getting back to environmental impact, it's been a real problem fighting the large tourist companies in the Caribbean because there's so many small jurisdictions. And if Grenada says, sorry, you cannot, you must pay higher fees for environmental protection if you want to bring your ships in or want to bring your visitors in, the tourist companies just said, nope, we're going elsewhere. And they did. And so it's been a bit of a fight and trying to get the Caribbean states together to actually pull in the same way. Not the same in Alaska, because all the ports are in Alaska, or almost all of them. And the moment they passed regulations, the other US states on the West Coast and British Columbia were happy to join them. So what happens? First, and they're going to be about the first ones in the world, besides Norway, to actually have fully electrified cruise ships, which Hurtigruten now has there. So you can almost cruise, at least while you're there, greenhouse gas free. They're going to do the same thing on the West Coast. Right now, you can't land a ship without plugging it in and turning the boilers off. They also have by far the strongest ocean dumping and other controls, as well as controls on ship speed near whales, all sorts of things, because they've got a single jurisdiction. And if Ketchikan wants you to behave, you can't just say, well, we'll go to Juneau instead. Well, sorry, Juneau has the same rules. And so does Vancouver, so does Prince Rupert, so does Seattle. It's working. And in fact, one of the cruise lines was fined several millions of dollars for dumping only about 3 years ago. A lot of money, really a lesson to all of them that they really mean it. Now, when you also you want to travel less on a ship, we're trying to convince them to do shorter cruises. That is, you may go to sort of 10 islands within a few hundred or thousand miles, rather than going halfway across the ocean between ports and burning fuel the whole way. They can also make the ships go a lot slower. And because they have shorter distances, it is least reasonable to have battery-powered ships. It's not as easy as
battery-powered ships.
You bet. Now let's talk about why. It's fine. You can actually, they are doing that now. I mentioned in Hurtigruten in Norway, because they have hydropower for all recharging. So it's going to work pretty well in Alaska and in British Columbia and in Newfoundland and in Norway. It's not going to work in the Caribbean or the South Pacific because they have no hydropower sources to power them. But the answer is yes, they can go electric, at least in those places.
I've been told that we're not going to see electric airplanes, that you just can't do that. But I assumed, well, the ships are bigger than airplanes, and therefore we will never see electric ships either. But
Oh, not at all. You can put as much weight in one of those as you want. I mean, you're not going to put 10,000 pounds worth of batteries in a light plane, but you could easily put hundreds of tons of batteries in as ballast. That is one of the easiest places to do. It's easier, probably easier in many cases than, in fact, there are small electric ships available now.
No kidding. Isn't that good news?
Mhm.
I'm all right. I'm already planning my next trip.
Well, just don't go to the South Pacific, because you're going to have to bring in all the oil to power your boat.
Okay, you say there are a few ships now already using batteries.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, my goodness, where are they?
They are mainly in Norway. They are for coastal travel, both as ferries and as cruise ships, and they just plug in at every port. Now, the other point is that every port's not that far apart, so they're only going a few hundred kilometers at most between ports before they plug in again. So you don't have to carry hundreds of tons of batteries.
Is there any possibility of capturing any of the carbon emissions anyway from this bunker oil, which I gather is the dirtiest kind of oil?
Well,
has anybody proposed?
Well, the good news is that none of the cruise ship companies are using bunker oil. It's mainly the freighters that are using the bunker oil still. All of the new cruise ships, there are some older ones still on the old bunker oil, but they're gradually taking them off, and they are doing scrubbing on the stacks, so that the amount that's going out is significantly less than 20 years ago out of the same type of ship. But no, they're not perfect yet. So by and large, most tourists are on side. Certainly the new ones that are more ecologically and culturally sensitive are. The old mass tourism is still a problem. There are still an awful lot of people who just want to go to the nearest beach and stay drunk for 2 weeks before they're poured back off when they get home. And that is a cultural problem for actually programming people. But if they're going to be drunk on a beach, why wouldn't they just do it down the road as opposed to flying a long way to pollute other cultures?
Well, that's the way I would look at it. But then I'm not enthusiastic about the group tours anyway. I mean, I've done a little bit when that's the only way I could go.
Right.
But if I have a choice of, and I wonder how many tourists actually do what I do, which is, well, I have physical impairments. It's hard for me to walk. So I remember being in Rome where the bus left us off one place and we were supposed to walk through the Forum or wherever to past the Colosseum and so on to the next bus thing. And I just about didn't make it. I didn't know what I was going to do. But so there are a lot of places where I definitely would avoid getting off the bus and going and being stuck where I couldn't get to the next place. So what I usually do, or was doing when I was still traveling a lot, was I would get to, let's say, Florence, and instead of staying with a group that goes around doing walking tours and stuff, I get to one of these round the city hop on, hop off buses.
Yeah.
And I would get on there and I'd go about 3 or 4 times all around the city, because once you get on, you can stay on as long as you want.
Sure.
And it didn't get old,
Yeah.
because by the time you've gone one loop, you think, oh, no, let me see if I could figure out where I was. And you go 2 or 3 more times and you sort of get a sense by then of what the real city dimensions are like, So I love to do it that way.
Well, there's a lot going on right now for elderly and handicapped travel. Before my wife died a couple of years ago, we were working a lot on developing what's called iAccess.travel, which is a website to provide information for people who do have challenges and to provide them with the information necessary up front to let them know what they're actually going to run into. Just on a factual basis, how many steps, how steep, how far, how exposed, and whether services are there. It's still on my website if anybody is interested. It's just called iaccess.world. And it's a way of providing information on anywhere in the world to people who might be interested in it.
Okay,
They can look in
if
advance.
if you give me the link there, I'll put it on the
Yeah, I
title
can do
page at
that,
the end. Yeah.
certainly. But
Okay.
that is there for anyone to provide information to others, clarifying exactly what information would be required by the handicapped community, whether they can walk up 8 stairs or not, whether they need to have a rail, whether they can walk on cobblestones,
Mhm.
all sorts of facts for places like Florence or anywhere else, if the people wishing to provide the services will put that on their own websites. We've set up the templates. And we've done it through the World Tourism Organization as well to get that access to anyone who wants to use it. But that's just one of many initiatives. There are handicap tours or elder tours for most popular places in the world now who will craft a tour for you, for your own capacity. They won't tell you you have to climb to the top of the mountain, but they will show you how to get pretty close to a nice place to view the mountain.
Right. Mhm. Because I have the impression that a hell of a lot of tourists are older. That's when you
Mhm.
get enough money to be able to go someplace, and then you're too crippled up to enjoy it.
Well, they have money and time, and that is why that part of the industry is growing very fast. There are some excellent companies that do just that, that just deal with specific uh, challenges that people may have. They try to design tours for that. I mean, even just for folks like us, where we're not about to run to the top of the mountain, but if you did want to get to Florida, there are nice bus tours that just take people who want to stop at the nicest places, stop at a few nice restaurants. Some people will carry their baggage. They will end early enough in the day to go and rest. Designed specifically for somebody who wants a leisurely trip to somewhere, and they'll pick you up and bring you back. Now, it's not as cheap as taking the Greyhound and heading straight through, but it is convenient for those people who now have the time and money to do it.
Mhm. Well, it certainly makes sense. I mean, I think really a cruise is an ideal
Mhm.
means of transportation for
Yeah.
people who want to travel who are physically limited
No,
in some
it
way.
is a no-brainer, really, for people who wish service. I mean, they essentially will be given a lot of interesting opportunities to see nice places and at their own pace. And they wake up every morning in another interesting place. So, of course, they're prepared to pay money and increasingly longer tours because the people have enough time to go for 2 or 3 weeks. So the industry is changing. The same thing true with resorts, where they're laying out resorts specifically for people who don't want a wall-to-wall party. They just want to have a very pleasant, relaxing time in a nice place with cultural experiences and a range of things. The fact is, tourism is not going to go away. It's going to change. I mean, the moment people could tour, starting with Thomas Cook back in the end of the late 19th century, they began doing so.
Mhm.
And really, it was just a reason to get away from your own job and your own home, particularly at a time of year when someplace else is a lot nicer. And it is
Well, my
continuing to do
interest,
that.
yeah, I usually when I've traveled, it's most often been to conferences
Mhm.
overseas, various kinds of either academic meetings,
Yeah.
or most of the time I've been active in the peace movement. So there are
Mhm.
lots and lots of peace
Sure.
movements, especially in the 80s. We had a lot of them.
Right.
But my interest has always been not so much to look at the buildings. I would never probably make a special trip just to look at the Eiffel Tower. I
Mhm.
would only prefer to go someplace uh, to to meet or to watch people in situations that I might not be able to see them in at home.
Mhm.
So interacting with local people about issues that are of interest or different from what I'm used to.
Mhm.
And therefore, if I were a young person, I think it would be ideal for young persons to to go one of these things where you live with a family or you do an exchange trip. I mean, I know there are things where high school kids go visit each other's countries and so on. I don't know how many of those things exist for older people who are willing to take a chance culturally and try to actually meet people in situations that might be challenging.
Actually, there's a lot of them, and there's also things where they're actually taking retired people over to use some of their experience and able to provide advice, whether it's to build houses and schools while they're there, or to give lectures in another language, or to really those kind of exchanges are very significant. Canada is actually fairly important in doing that. In fact, there are a number of initiatives for people, for particularly recent retirees who still have something to offer and can assist people. Even
Well,
if
of course,
it's only
there are
repairing
always
refrigerators. Yeah.
there have always been things like these university student arrangements and stuff. And I have another woman friend who went on one of these WE tours. I mean, she was a big donor to the outfit that got bad publicity this last year in Canada, you know. But she would go to Africa and actually build a school, you know, physically lay the bricks and stuff. And I think that kind of thing is like pay your own way to being a Peace Corps volunteer.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, and in fact, there are agencies that will set that up. I must admit, I'm not familiar enough with those. People actually call me to get me to come to help them, and I don't have to go through that. But I know they exist. I've met other people.
Well, do you call those people tourists or not?
Well, you can call anybody a tourist. I mean, they are traveling outside of where they normally live to see something they don't normally see. And I mean, like you found, you can be a tourist and a presenter at a conference, or somebody for a variety of reasons. If I used to do a lot of business in China, cleaning up factories that needed a lot of help. And while I was there, I always visited the nicest places nearby. You don't want to spend all your time digging up septic tanks in factories. So yeah, an awful lot of travel goes for a very large range of reasons.
Well, you early on, you mentioned the notion that, you know, when we travel, we damage things and have to be careful or be taught how not to do anything environmentally destructive. I've heard of things like in the Galapagos, people who go there, they are very, I believe, they're pretty careful about not allowing people to, you know, stray off the path, or I think there are a lot of rules about that. Is that something that applies in other places too? What are some of the damages that people might do besides breathing on things?
Oh, you don't want to do that. You can't breathe the air. It's bad for you. Yeah, the fact is, of course, that we exist and therefore we have an impact, even if it's minimal. Mass tourism is really one of the worst ones, because you put 50,000 people on a beach, they're going to leave a mess. So really, we've been trying to reduce mass tourism, or put the masses in a place where we can control them. I have a picture of over 200,000 people on a beach in Romania, a place called Coștineț, where we were actually teaching sustainable tourism. And seeing 200,000 people enjoying themselves was terrific, as long as they stayed on the beach, and as long as an awful lot of time and money, time and energy was put cleaning up after them and installing the facilities so that they.
I'm sorry, where was that?
Coștineț, Romania, on the Black Sea coast.
Yeah.
And it was a Communist Youth Party resort, which and they were there for other reasons, but they were sure having a good time. But that's probably the most dense package of people I've ever seen. I can show you pictures of those if you're interested. But that said, as long as a lot of work was done to clean up after them, and that was done, it wasn't a bad place, and everybody had a good time. And when somebody says, well, what's the carrying capacity for people on the beach? Well, for that beach, it was probably 200,000 people because it kept them where you could control them and kept them where you could clean up after them. And they were not really allowed to destroy anything. And I have another picture of two people in a sunset on a beautiful beach at Big Sur. And somebody says, well, what's the carrying capacity? And I say, well, it's two. You bring a third or fourth person in, they do not have that beautiful experience of the sunset with the seagulls over them and so forth. It's a very social concept, that of carrying capacity. And we just did a study in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, which is considered to be one of the most perfect small towns in the world, also a small town for tourism. And it was a study on carrying capacity and all of the conditions we had to do to limit how many people did what where, and on timing, on who we actually worked to attract. I mean, we were not going after the Hells Angels. We wanted to bring in people interested in art and music and photography and so forth. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of managing this sector starts as early as when I give you a brochure. And essentially says, you're the kind of person that we think would enjoy this. Mm-hmm. And it goes the other way too. You're the kind of person that we think we'd enjoy having here. And it's a sort of a negotiation between the people who live in and own the place and those people who wish to visit it.
Is this a concept? You use the word carrying capacity. Of course, yeah. Environmentalists use that. I'm not sure how reasonable that term is, but is that something that tourist businesses generally use? They ask how many people is just too many, and for a particular accommodation.
The question's easier to ask than answer for a variety of reasons. There certainly is a biophysical carrying capacity of just how many people you can cram onto the same beach, or how many people can go down a river at the same time without destroying it. Another one on carrying capacity is what we call the limits to acceptable change. And that is usually negotiated with villages or with communities to see just how tolerant they are of change. How much are they prepared to put up with to gain money, to gain reputation, to gain services, and so forth. And it's very much a community-based negotiation that tends to happen whether people understand it or not.
Well, to what extent is there mutual accommodation? For example, I don't travel much to Muslim countries, mm-hmm. but there women. I see journalists, for example, reporting from mm-hmm. Afghanistan or so on, or Saudi Arabia, and the CNN journalists will be wearing a hijab.
Have to, yeah.
And I don't know. I just wonder, how much do they change, or how is it negotiated that if you're going to be here at all, you have to behave in such and such a way? You can't, I remember, you can't go into certain Catholic cathedrals if you have short sleeve dresses. You're supposed to wear long sleeves. Not all of them, I gather. I hope not. Mm-hmm. But there are kinds of cultural norms that I expect are probably honored in the breach more than they are in the fulfillment. But I also wonder whether sometimes the impact of the tourist, as an example, can be actually beneficial for people in the host country. For example, if a Canadian woman goes to a Muslim country and wears shorts or something, or behaves in a way that's not normal there. Mm-hmm. Are there any cases in which this kind of sets an example for the local women to say, well, maybe that's what I'll wear? What are the pluses and minuses of the mutual cultural demonstrations or patterning of how one lives when traveling?
First, you can't generalize, really. I mean, some like Saudi Arabia are not about to negotiate. Their norms are very set and agreed. And in fact, anyone who tries to deviate will be punished. I mean, even the stewardesses on the Lufthansa flight into Jeddah have to get into full purdah before they get off the plane, and so do all the other women coming in. They are taken in a van and kept in one hotel, and they have now negotiated to allow them, as long as they wear full hijab and full cover, to at least walk up and down about 100 yards of the Malecon while they're in Jeddah before the plane goes back out. But that is about the most rigid that I have run into. On the other hand, if you go to the beach, Lebanon, it's quite different. And remember, they're the same. Many of them are the same religion. There's a broad range. They're much, and certainly in Dubai or even Oman, they're far more open. They will allow women in bathing suits to at least go to the beach, to certain beaches, or certainly to the hotel pools. That would be out of the question in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
So yes, they're very negotiable. But just remember, even different parts of our country, there are communities who would be offended if people dressed like they do at the beach in other ones.
Sure.
So it becomes a negotiation process. You know, what are the limits to acceptable change? And that will be very cultural specific. We use participatory processes in most tourism destinations to negotiate what's acceptable and what's not, and what has to be. I mean, we can get access to the beach, as in some of the ones we've done in Kenya, by guaranteeing that the locals have access to the beach at other times, and the beach cleanup and such is done, negotiated between them, and some of the services that are on the beach have been provided by the tourism industry, and so they have agreed situation where the cultures in some cases do meet, in other cases they don't. Whereas in the Maldive Islands, they never meet because all of the Maldivians live on the next island over, and they're really never allowed to meet the people in the resort islands. They are a fairly restrictive Muslim cultures, and nearly all of the villages that the residents live on are not the same islands as the people working in the resorts. The odd Sri Lankan woman is allowed to come in to serve the tourists, but by and large, the islands are isolated.
All of this is done just to make sure there's no cultural contamination.
Well, you can call it that. I don't think they see it that way. They just see it as protecting themselves from the ugly foreigners who might influence their own people.
It sounds as if you've been engaged yourself in this business of preliminary negotiation before you can set up a tour business. Tell me about that.
As I say, I don't have a tourism business. I help the community set up their identification of values for they can participate in that negotiation.
So you really are that's a large part of what you do.
Yeah.
Negotiations. Okay, give me some examples.
Well, I'm just trying to think. Well, right now we're working in Ecuador, right where the equator hits the ocean. It's where Captain Cook is reputed to have landed in that part of the world. It is likely to become a park. They're looking at perhaps getting it World Heritage Site, and I'm there helping them get the criteria in to be recognized as a UN World Tourism Organization, a tourism observatory. To get that, they are going to have to make certain changes. They are already looking at accumulating the land. They are looking at trying to bring in other communities to participate in building it, in managing it, in identifying which of the villages are not going to be part of the development. It's really just negotiating with an entire region regarding what they want to look like in 20 years' time.
Mm-hmm. Now, some places get to be known as sort of an enclave for foreigners.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a town in Mexico.
Allende, that's the one I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So now these are not tourists anymore. These are year-round. I guess a lot of them live there half of the year or more of the year.
Yeah.
Is that right? Have you been involved within setting up? Oh, you've changed your background. Where are we?
Yes, that is San Miguel de Allende. That's where we did a study about 2 years ago on just that subject. Really?
Okay, tell me about it. You were working there.
Yeah, it's considered the last 4 out of the last 5 years. Condé Nast Traveler picked it as the nicest little town in the planet. So right away, an awful lot of people began to come there. They have a serious issue of too much traffic in the center, particularly on weekends, because there's a lot of other towns around and other people, not only foreign tourists, but local ones come in because it's the best restaurants in central Mexico. It has the best festivals in central Mexico. And it has a serious issue of trying to manage traffic and people. So the first thing we did was got all the cars out of the middle. You can have people there, not cars. That's one of the main tactics that's really eased it off.
How do they feel about that if they can't drive in their own town?
Well, a few of the locals who did have cars in the middle are given a permit. And after certain hours, they're allowed to leave their cars there. But because there's a small electric bus goes around for free every 10 minutes, it's probably easier to leave your car not on the street, but a half mile away, and it takes you there for free every short while, or for a very low price. I mean, the whole idea is to keep everybody's vehicles out. I mean, little things like not having all the festivals on the peak days. Try and schedule them if you can for shoulder days, so that you don't pile all the people on each other. The whole idea again of advertising, you don't advertise the biggest festivals. You don't need to. They're coming anyway. You instead try and advertise the other ones, so bringing people in to look at local painting and art, or bringing people into special music festivals and so forth. Spreading some of the attractions out of the center into some nice little parks nearby and other things. I guess actually we're just trying to use every trick to defuse them. We don't let we move the buses off the main street, because right now it's growing too fast, and they're looking at now zoning to try and keep the number of Airbnbs out of it. So,
how do you feel about Airbnbs? I have found, I've only stayed in the 3, but I have really enjoyed it, because it's exactly the kind of, it's close to the kind of thing we were talking about, going, pay your own way as a Peace Corps volunteer. You really get to meet the owner, the proprietor.
Well, a lot of the Airbnbs, though, are just, they'll rent you the whole house, or they'll rent through their apartment and you will never see them. They are very controversial right now. Some towns have actually banned them. Many have regulations that say you cannot simply buy a house, turn it all into 10 Airbnbs and rent it as an apartment building. There are limits in several cities, like the amount of the number of nights you are allowed to lease in a row, or the number in a year, or the number in a month. The idea is to not overburden and to wipe out the hotel industry, where you have other people who are actually paid and licensed to manage them properly.
So that sounds like the controversy between the Uber people and the taxi companies, that
exactly the same.
Anything is going to put the taxi people out of business. Yeah,
exactly the same, and making sure that they have standards. I mean, in San Miguel de Allende, they're looking at there were a few before you were allowed to actually sell an Airbnb, it must be licensed as having fire access. It must be licensed as having adequate parking. It must be licensed, inspected by the local, and then you will be licensed for selling it out a certain number of nights a year. But and you again, that is becoming very common globally. And the idea is again to maintain the standards and to have some degree of control. Mm-hmm. In other parts of the world, that's an issue just for squatters around Lake Balaton, where a lot of people were simply renting sheds and anything else in the peak summer period with no control. Mm-hmm. And again, the number of people who want to come somewhere temporarily becomes a real challenge to control, to keep them in hand, to get rid of the garbage, to have places to park the cars, everything.
Well, so far, everything you have said is encouraging to me because it makes me feel it's really impressive how much attention is being given to the overall question of many different things, how to accommodate people with physical impairments and all these other concerns. But coming back to the basic question that we raised, I'm still not sure I know the answer. People now are aware that to really prevent the runaway global warming, we're going to have to make some very, very rigid and drastic changes in our lifestyle. And I'm still not convinced that, from what you've said, although I like what you've said, that means that we can still go ahead and take vacations abroad, etc. It really?
My answer is you can't stop them under normal systems of governance that we understand. North Korea is successful in stopping it, and Cuba largely so too. So there is a social trade-off in terms of being able to control whether you let people out or for how long or where.
Well, now look here. We've done a very good job of restricting travel during COVID.
Yeah.
Definitely, unless your mother is dying in another country, and even then, maybe you can't go. Very frequently, they don't let you. So they have rules that are very stringent. And I'm not sure whether we won't get to the point of feeling that our climate issue is so serious that we have to impose rules like that.
I hope you're wrong, but you may well be onto something. There are a number of sacrifices a lot of people are going to be asked to make if we get this right. And that means not owning the Hummer, and that means not living in a 12 bedroom house. It means not owning an aircraft. It means not owning a lot of changes in lifestyle. It means not eating a pound of steak every night. All of those things will have to happen. Do any of our politicians have the guts to do it? Well, not right now.
Well, we've come to the end, and I don't think our question is answered, I'm
really not sure either, Meta. We can reduce the footprint of tourism per person. We can reduce the overall footprint. If we can use economic instruments to make it way more expensive to do the things that are more environmentally egregious, that will work too if the political system will let us do that. Are we prepared to put $100 or $200 tag on every air flight just in order to do environmental offsets? I don't know. And yet that may be coming.
Yeah. Okay, this has been fun and very informative. I hope a lot of people watch it and learn from it. And I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much, Jeff.